Milk? That's my call sign. People have trouble with Iveen, at least reading it. Scifi and humans.
She grinned, pointing back to a human man winding his way toward the table.
Cookie, this is Melondi. Seems she has a human friend with a problem.
Melondi looked up at the human as he came to the table. He stood there like a soldier. She'd seen enough of them growing up to know the signs. He was wearing dark flight aviator glasses, pushed up on his head, but unlike Milk, he was dressed more formally, in a plain white shirt, khaki pants, and black shoes. Compared to Scifi men, his outfit was so plain that it stood out like a beacon. You know, I thought they were pulling our legs, but that was some damn fine chicken. He slipped into his seat with an amiable smile. Pleased to meet you, miss. So, what's the problem exactly?
She was just getting to it.
Milk set her chin on her hands, leaning forward.
So, you have a human friend that's been injured?
Melondi glanced at Cookie as he picked at the remains of his lunch. It looked like they'd been having the fried chicken, and he nodded at her again.
I didn't expect to, but they don't know me. What's the harm? My friend was badly wounded in a fight with a noble. He saved my life. I know this sounds insane, but I think she was trying to kill me, she said, then continued more quietly. He's in the hospital, and they're not sure if he's going to live.
A crazy noble wanting to kill you, Cookie said evenly, then slowly nodded. I think maybe we can understand. Is the whole thing settled? Are you safe?
I have protection, Melondi answered truthfully. It just was a surprise. Anyway, I was wondering, my friends and I are all worried. I've heard humans are tough.
We do all right. Cookie and I have been through some tough spots before and after the invasion, but we've gotten through. Milk chuckled, then shrugged. That probably doesn't help too much, but that's life. You know what you know. If you don't know, then you don't know and you make do, you know? I think what Milk's trying to say is humans are pretty fair survivors, Cookie said, picking at a bit more of his chicken. If your friend's in the hospital, he must have a decent chance. Imperial medicine is pretty miraculous.
God works in mysterious ways, Milk said, with a sly grin aimed at Cookie. God? Melondi asked, confused. My friend doesn't talk about his, your deities much.
Hey, someone has to be responsible for the whole fucking mess, Milk winked. I figure now the shill are in charge, your bunch upstairs can take over. I couldn't care less. Any priest back home could have damned me for my sins a long time ago. Milk, I think that's probably a bit off track. Cookie settled back in his chair, taking a sip of his drink. Sorry, miss, just a bit of old history.
Yeah, well, I'm Irish. We're every god's gift to long vendettas and lost causes,
Milk shrugged, defensively, and picked at a roll before leaning forward and shaking her fiery hair proudly.
We're still having arguments over Oliver Cromwell, because we remember.
Shame you can't remember what happened last night.
It's not a good party if you can remember all of it.
Milk grinned unrepentantly at her partner.
What's the use of being on leave while the techs do their thing, unless we let our hair down? Anyway, sorry, Melondi, he's right about that. Have you thought about carrying a knife?
Milk.
What? A girl has to protect herself.
Miss, if you're following Milk's advice, get a very good lawyer in your pocket early, Cookie grimaced, shaking his head in exasperation. Not to press, but you didn't say if you're safe or not.
I don't know. I can't believe it happened. The woman who came after me had no reason at all, so I guess I think there's someone else behind it,
Melondi said in a rush, then curbed herself, feeling she was babbling.
They'd be pretty dangerous people. Well, you've got a human on your side, Milk winked. Fortunately, we are too. It's all such a mess.
Melondi gulped, feeling the lump in her throat.
I'm sorry. I don't even know you. It just didn't seem real. Really, I'm sorry. Hey now, this isn't your fault. Just listen to me. You need to stand up for yourself, not apologize.
Milk reached over to take her hand.
That's something I learned early on. You start that, You end up doing it over and over, till who you are starts falling apart. So don't even start. That's not where your head needs to be right now.
Melondi thought about it for a long moment and looked at Milk. The scar, the confidence of any Marine to match her bust, taking care of her man.
Mum would probably love her. I thought I could handle this when it was happening. Now it feels like I'm second-guessing everything, she admitted. I don't know who to trust except for my friends. All the people I know I'd usually ask. I don't know if they're safe.
Take good care of your friends, Milk nodded. Get a good knife, though. And a good lawyer. Cookie made a face at her, then glanced back to Melondi. Your friend will probably need one when he gets better. Maybe you can find someone to help you by finding someone for him.
Actually, yes, I think that might be a good idea.
Melondi smiled at them both, rising from the table.
Something to do would be better than waiting. A friend of mine said the same thing, but I didn't know what it should be. Thank you both.
Not a problem. I hope your friend gets better, Milk said, holding up her Omnipad. If you want my contact, I don't mind. Just in case. That was nice of you, Cookie said, watching the girl slip back to her friends. What are you thinking?
Sholvanti Nobles.
Milk shook her head before nodding once towards Melondi. Going after kids? She seems sweet, Cookie said. I hope she comes out of this okay.
Cookie, no one comes back from that okay. No one at all.
I know, but I can still hope. All right. We have hours until touchdown, and the bridge says we ought to be on the ground around 3 p.m. local time. A shuttle will take us to the palace by 4 at the latest. Adam slumped down on the sofa to wrap his arms around Ferry and slip, looking over to where Classy was sitting at the desk. Sel was peering over her shoulder, and he shut his eyes. It was still damned early ship time. What's the news from the ground? Classy sat back in her chair and crossed her legs, a fingertip rising elegantly to her lips as she considered the screen. I have a situation report. Now we're close enough to get a secured type beam transmission, I've sent requests for dossiers on everyone around her, but we're still going to need to meet behind closed doors to get real details. I don't trust the interior for anything more than that.
Is it that bad? Ferry asked, canting her head quizzically. I know this is a mess, but what about our usual sources? The ones who didn't leave with the court aren't talking. I think they're still doing damage assessment, but with Calandri dead? Camaldry has really alienated the military over the years. Lural is loved, but he's a man. I don't think the Imperium could stomach that after the last time. Classy shook her head almost imperceptibly. I love Kalira, and she's an adult now, but she hasn't been presented at court. Hasn't been able to make a name for herself with the public. She doesn't have any real allies. Slip sat up a little straighter. You don't think it could come to a dispute over the succession, do you? Empress Kamalesh has time to name a formal heir when she returns, but there will be delays. There's the funeral, then she'll be in seclusion for a month. I believe they're weighing the situation. They're hedging their bets, Adam said sourly. All the big players are off of Cammy, so it's the perfect time for someone to make a grab. No one else is willing to move since it's not their asses on the line. So, what have we got? The first thing to do is get back to the palace. Classy rubbed her chin thoughtfully. Kalira is home from the academy, and we can meet her as soon as we arrive. I'll call on a secure line as soon as we touch down. Adam, have you heard anything from Dr. Khalil? It's not great news. The doc put Warwick into a medical coma. That wouldn't have been a big deal back home, but when shield medicine can't patch you up, that's not good. Adam kicked one foot in the air and frowned. I can't believe he killed her with a katana. Fuck. I hope he lives. I kinda want to meet this guy. Were they any help? Belder asked anxiously, as Melondi slipped back to the table. Kind of. I think so. It was definitely different advice, but not exactly. Melondi picked up her water and took a sip, staring at the table as the girls waited expectantly. It was the right sort of help, but I need to think it over, if that makes any sense. Enough, Pris nodded. I still can't believe the professor is in the hospital, but I haven't had the time to process it. You must be in shock. Goddess, Desi must be losing her mind.
She grimaced as she rubbed her hands awkwardly.
So, why the meeting, though? You should be home with your family. You could have sent us a text or called. I needed to get out. I mean, I can't talk to you about what's going on with my family here, but I needed to know if you'd hear me out when we can. If I didn't do something about what's going on, I think I'd go stir crazy.
Melondi set the water back down and took a few steps.
Order lunch for us? I need to slip inside the kitchen and see Vadim for a bit. In private, you know.
Pris gave a sympathetic smile as Mel moved off towards the kitchen, then turned to Belder with a sigh.
What an awful mess. I hope Vadim can take her mind off it.
Sitting together at the table in the staff room, Vadim fidgeted impatiently a moment after Melondi, goddess, the princess, finished speaking. It really didn't help to have his father peeking through the office window, but at least the noise of the kitchen kept them from being overheard.
Look, why are you trying to act alone in this? If people are out to kill you, they have to be a small group. You need more people in this, not less. You must have friends, political allies of your mother, even enemies who would be willing to help if it got them in better graces with your mother.
He watched her consider it for a moment before she spoke.
In the past, I had gone to Countess Samilla. She's one of Mother's closest friends, but she and most of the court are gone now. I don't know much about the people who stayed, and my real friend back at the palace is Lady Wakama. I trust her, but she has no power in the government, and I don't want to put her at risk. There's too much going on with the different duchesses at court over who is going to sit where for the funeral. I don't trust any of them, and if I came out with something like this, it could create a crisis for my mother. I think I'd rather go swim in a riptide.
What about the Minister for the Interior? She's charged with protecting your whole family.
That's the problem, she pointed out,
taking another bite of cheesecake.
I admire her, but she's supposed to look out for the whole family. With Calandri dead, her loyalties could be with my sister, Camordri. Even if they aren't, Countess Ray Lynn looks at shadows inside shadows. If I go to her, it could seem like I'm starting some sort of game against my sister or brother.
Then what about Potak? He asked, exasperated.
Potak? Melondi snorted. I've hardly met the woman after Mother appointed her as High Advocate in the Ministry of Justice. She's prudish, even for an Adixie.
Who cares about prudish? Vadim hissed, as one of the servers moved past.
Desi was right in her text. You need real help. Look, everyone sucked their teeth when you... The Empress appointed an Adixie as her legal advisor, but think about it. The whole capital sings her praises now as being totally straight. She's the enemy of anything corrupt, and if she's afraid of anything, I've never heard about it. She's taken cases against the entire court when she thought it was right, and the gossip says she's turned down bribes that would have tempted a planetary governess. You're sure you didn't study political science instead of cooking?
Mel raised an eyebrow and grimaced. Vadim sniffed, his face taking on a look of regal disinterest.
You need to be able to hold an intelligent conversation when a noble is dining. Maybe. You're right. Desi is right. I have to get the tools I need to handle this, not do it alone, Melondi sighed. I just have to work up the nerve to go see the woman.
I can do you a fish platter in supplication.
Not funny.
You think that's not funny? I still have to talk to my father. Vadim glanced over his shoulder towards his father's office. The blinders on the office window rustled.
I mean, I appreciate you letting me, and I'm looking forward to our second date. But if you're letting me tell him... You've given me cheesecake. She leaned in and winked. As far as I'm concerned, this is our second date.
Kadira usually enjoyed a light lunch. The refectory for senior palace staff set a superb table with a view out over the north garden. Diners could sit along the veranda in the warmer months, enjoying the sunshine while they discussed the news or the business of the day. It was airy and spacious, allowing patrons to quietly converse in a measure of privacy. The food was invariably excellent. Used to dining alone, her normal routine had been upended since the departure of Princess Camordry. That was only to be expected after the extra duties of tending to the palace fell upon her shoulders. Still, it was uncomfortable. Virtually every meal had been turned into a working meeting of some fashion or other. It cleared up time during the day to get matters resolved, and allowed her normal work to continue largely unimpeded by the constant requests and logistical details. But it was irksome. Used to her privacy, the upending parade of functionaries that ran the Northern Palace was like grit, wearing on her mind. With Camordry's attendants away, an unending litany of distractions and squabbles now came to her. It drained her energy, and every so often she simply had to cut them loose for time alone. Today, her meal sat untouched. Needy people. The more you're relied upon, the more freedom you have. There's nothing to fear from people who depend on you for their prosperity, as long as you set limits. Still, as unsettled as she was, she'd had the time to digest the reports. As a senior agent in the Family Protection Unit, even a passive review of the reports issued by Princess Kalira's detail was more than adequate. As expected, Agent Davari had followed General Order 24. That meant that Sergeant Paris would be transferred out before the end of the week, and Davari would be selecting replacements. There was simply no time to invest the candidates with people under her control. Or Paris would be of use somewhere else, somewhere in the future, but for now, she could see and hear everything captured by the surveillance reports out of the academy. Review footage to her heart's content, but her reach had been curtailed. It was inconvenient. Not that she could let that show to others. That would raise questions. She'd gotten where she had by avoiding the temptation of showing others how hard she worked. It only raised questions. Instead, she'd taken the long view, making her accomplishments seem effortless. Admiral Tajo's death was still priceless. It sat there in her memory palace like a gleaming trophy, glittering in its pride of place, the latest piece in her collection of personal victories. But Camordry would want results. She wanted Kalira dead, and while disappointing Camordry invariably happened from time to time, there was no doubt that she would demand answers, and action. Answers were ready enough. Tajo could be explained as a plausible attempt at Kalira's life. Sergeant Orena's death would even be useful. She could paint the deceased admiral as a competent killer, having slain the sergeant before closing in for Kalira's death. She could even say it with a straight face. The footage from Orena's body camera was easy to interpret. The woman had a clear view of Tajo, but also Kalira, her professor, and several other students. Faced with the prospect of witnesses, she'd hesitated, waited for them to go inside, as she tried to delay Tajo a few extra moments. Tajo should plausibly have been expected to remain collected when faced by so many people. Instead, something made the woman come unglued, and Orena paid the price. That didn't solve the problem with Camordry, however. The princess wouldn't be content with a failure, and that required action. Matters needed to be set in motion. Fortunately, there was another approach. After Melondi left, Vadim waited a while, clearing away the dish with the cheesecake and thinking about it. A second date? Already? With a princess? A second date? And in her circles that meant something. She'd already said she wanted a third, and that really meant something. At least, he had her permission. Dad would understand. Probably. He stepped back out of the staff room to find his father standing by one of the cooks, waving his arms at the storeroom. Badine paused at the dish on the stove, crossed his arms and flounced in place. It was a good flounce, and he even ran a hand through his hair theatrically. The cook cringed. Vadim had grown up seeing that flounce, but the hand in the air move tore it, and he kept his ears open as he walked closer. "No! Didn't I tell you never to use any of the ingredients on the top shelf? Badine flailed one arm toward the pantry, his voice growing more exasperated with every word. "No one is to do any unauthorized experimenting in my kitchens unless I say so. Did I say so? No, I did not." "But we're out of the red peppers and the shipment isn't due until tomorrow, sir." The cook, an old friend of his father's named Porvith, wailed and pulled at his hair and clutched at his tunic. My art will be in ruins." Vadim sighed. They were both going at it. It was just going to be that kind of day. "What did you put in it, anyway?" Vadim grabbed up the can and looked at the label, running the translator app over it from his Omnipad. "Ghost peppers? Fine. Tell them we're out of the stir-fry, but the staff can have this for lunch. Dad?" Badine looked theatrically to the heavens, then rolled his head over one shoulder, looking his way. "Son, you need to see what I'm dealing with. Someday all of this will be—" "Dad, is about the professor." Vadim swallowed. Interrupting his father wasn't something he did lightly, but Badine blinked and focused. "Dad, I have some bad news and I guess some good news. Could we go to your office? It's important." Badine led the way, closing the office door behind them, then wheeled in place, raising one eyebrow. "All right, my boy, I'm listening. What's the bad news, Has that girl let you go? I warned you to be careful, didn't I? I know I did. Didn't I tell you about what things were like before I met your mother? You have to develop some sense about these things. I know. You start dressing up instead of those dull old things you were wearing. You catch some girl's eye, and she's there and gone." He huffed once with a hard nod. "Tell me all about it." "No, it's not that. It's... Dad, Professor Warwick was injured very badly. He's dead?" Badine squealed and clutched his chest. "I love the man. He saved our business. Goddess, Vadim. We hadn't even met his girlfriends, and I was going to... Dad, he isn't dead." Vadim raised his voice. "They don't know how he is, but he's in the hospital. All we know is he's in intensive care." "What?" Dad looked back at him and paused. "Why'd you go and scare me like that? You nearly gave me a heart attack." "Well, what's the good news? There has to be good news if he's in the hospital, because that has to have been the bad news." Badine wandered over to his desk and sat down heavily at his chair. "We'll cook some chicken for him as soon as we get news. He told you the story about the 2 fried chickens, right? It must be human medicine. Fried chicken, chicken soup, chicken wings. We'll bring it all." "Well, it's about Melondi, Dad. The date was interesting." Vadim swallowed and dove in. "Dad, she's a princess." "Of course she is, son. They all are." Vadim huffed and checked his nails. "She is very lucky to have you." "Dad, I don't think you're really listening." Porvith ran a spatula across the pan and looked at the stir-fry before giving it a sniff. It looked all right. "Honestly, one silly little substitution. And what was the harm? Goddess sing me, the couple would just have to understand. They were conjurers of culinary gems, each meal creating a gustatorial tour de force. Could you create a painting without paint? Could you? But since they'd gone into alien ingredients, well, human food had only been released onto the market months ago, after all those rumors. but the supply issues. Ah well, at least the staff could have it for lunch. Wasting food bordered on... Povif looked over as the piercing shriek penetrated the bustle of the kitchen and exchanged looks with Gwilly, the pastry chef. After a moment, the door opened, and Badin stepped out, and tugged at his jacket lapels, and walked over with young Vadim in tow. In all the years he'd worked, he'd never seen his friend and employer look that ashen. He didn't flounce, bounce, or sashay. He didn't even swagger. Povif, you have the kitchen, Badin wheezed somberly. I need to take my son shopping. Akaroon fluffed his tunic, careful not to wrinkle the fabric, as he sat down on the specially designed swivel stool, meant to give the musician full access to all 180 keys of the Taskatura. His feet dangled 3 inches off the ground, and the seat was far too wide for him to sit or swivel properly. Typical. The Taskatura was a monster of an instrument, taking up the majority of the private practice room space. Opting to stand instead of straining to reach both ends, he smacked an open palm on the right end of the curved marble keyboard, and descended through all 9 octaves. The audacity of the humans to create a Taskatura with only 88 keys and 7 octaves that uses strings. Strings! Those ridiculous wooden contraptions dared to sound just as beautiful as a concert. Royal grade Taskatura. He'd be mildly insulted if he wasn't so impressed. A chime emanated from his omnipad just as he was preparing to launch into a rapturous concerto. A text from Kamara. Math Girl 1. Kazan and I are so very sorry about the afternoon. We hope you enjoyed the show, despite the IOTC cadet that tried to pinch you, and the other thing. We would be ever so grateful if you might come back to visit after the break. We'd love to show you the music collection and can ask our professors for a private showing. No crowds. Please say yes? A make-up day? They wanted him back? Arku had suddenly feared they would not have forgiven him for never telling them the truth. He could tell it was quite a shock to the two of them, once they finally met in person. They must have understood, right? Online, you could talk to anyone however you wanted about anything you wanted. There was no pressure to say the right thing, no suitors pestering you for hours at a time, no special treatment for your protection. When they didn't know your true identity, there was authenticity, honesty, and sincerity in their speech. Speaking of honesty, he knew what he had to tell them. FM forever. I really enjoyed the show and would love to visit again. I'd also like to apologize for not disclosing the true nature of my identity until we met in person. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I was afraid you'd treat me differently. I enjoyed our conversations and didn't want them to end. I was a coward. Can you forgive me? Talk soon. Much practice. While he anticipated their response, he cracked his knuckles and stood, poised and ready, in front of the instrument. Forget Lizelt's Concerto No. 2. Today he'd try something special. He'd heard it only once, but that was all he needed. He felt his way through the keys, trying to find the right octave. Aha! There you are. If his suspicions were correct, the intro should be G, A, B, C. He didn't know a word of English, but still wanted to mimic the lyrics as closely as he could. You scared me love, and to rattle my brain. Thomas loving drives a man insane. You broke my will, Buddha till. Goodness gracious, get balls of ire. Adam tossed his omnipad down on the table and looked at his wives. Taking 5 each, they managed to cover most of the work in over 2 hours. I'm done. It took you a while, Classy smiled. Sel and Ferry tilted their heads to the side curiously, while Slip scrunched down in her chair, waiting. Warwick is former military. Chewing it over, he shook his head. US Air Force, separated as a captain, with a straightforward career in logistics. Not a pipe hitter or a zoomie. Spent some time in Japan, which explains the katana, I guess, but I'm a little worried. The file says he lost his whole family during the invasion. Nothing to say he worked for the resistance, but there's not a lot there either way. Seems he went dark for years, right before coming to Shill.
He came in the company of one of the Academy professors, Mevere Pelavon, Classy said. It's a minor house these days, but it was powerful once. Her file says a lot of her wealth has been funneled off as she's without an heir. You'll never guess to who.
Surprise us.
Alea.
Cell blinked.
Alea? That sector governess in North America?
The same.
Slip snickered.
Remember when she tried to pinch his ass and he nearly twisted her hand off? You think I'm going to forget?
Ferry leaned back and grinned.
That was priceless. It caused some difficulties finishing our mission.
Classy ran a hand through her hair and looked down. It didn't entirely hide her smile.
But I suppose it was worth it. Are things bad enough with Pelavon that there are money problems?
Cell rubbed her cheek thoughtfully.
We could be looking at a motive.
Classy shook her head once.
She's not wealthy now, but she seems financially solvent from what I can see in the file. She also has a Chloe Pabrine named Shalea, who appears stable, but we need to get down on the ground and start asking questions.
4 more hours, Adam sighed. Enough time to rack out.
Sure,
Slip grinned, and toyed with the zipper on her top.
If you want to sleep.
High Advocate Oppenmeyer Potak wasn't hard to find. There was a trial that afternoon in the High Court building, and after a moment or two checking, one of the guards driving her relayed that she would be attending because it was a capital case. Apparently, Potak wasn't satisfied with the juries lately, as fewer harsh sentences had been getting handed out, and she wanted to address the court. True to expectations, she was there outside the courtroom, sitting on a bench and surrounded by other advocates. Despite the opulent surroundings, the Adixie woman was wearing a grey tunic jacket, in a style so severe it could cut glass. Spotting Kalira, she rose, made her way over, and bowed as deeply as her girth allowed.
Greetings, Your Royal Highness.
Her Vatica was flawless, as polished gold.
Please rise, High Advocate, and a good day to you, Kalira said graciously, and nodded.
It felt good to be in a crowd, even with 6 death's heads circling outside.
I'm surprised at being recognized. I trust your time in court is going well today?
It was a husband who tried to poison his wife, and the jury went soft and merely voted for exile. There's a distressing lack of death sentences these days.
The Adixie's mouth worked, and Clara couldn't tell if it was a grin or grimace.
As to the other, well, the Minister of the Interior discussed your last few days with me, and I'd intended to seek you out later myself.
I see. Better luck next time?
Kalira felt like she was already flailing. Being Melondi was so much simpler these days. Leaning in, she whispered in the woman's ear.
I sought you out because I believe I need your services. I have few people to turn to, and there is a matter of life and death that I believe will affect the court.
That would be a great calamity.
Potak looked at her with dead eyes, walking them into an antechamber off the court.
I am listening, she said, before going motionless.
Telling Potak everything took less time than she would have thought. Aside from the occasional question, the Adixie didn't move a muscle, yet gave the impression she was absorbing every word and could recite the whole story verbatim if asked. When she finished, Potak sniffed and moved, slowly.
This is a worthy cause. It seems you have a genuine concern for the welfare of the Imperium. And, with the regrettable death of your elder sister, a sober approach to the reins of good government, Your elder sister Camordry is far too indulgent with things like gardening. We need someone who can get back to traditional values. The Empire could use more public executions for high crimes. The citizens don't revere the nobility because the nobility is not being held to public account. Let them endure some real hardships for the public welfare and...
Potek went on for some time. It just seemed to be the woman's nature. Eventually, she frowned down at the floor, rubbing her chin.
I see you have guards, but it's also a matter of confirming your suspicions. You can't simply act without proof, or you will become viewed as unreliable, reactionary, impulsive.
I agree, High Advocate, but I've been thinking about it. I don't think my aunt would try anything like this, but if it's my sister, Camordry... She is now the eldest daughter who's been presented at court. She has some of her supporters, and that could mean crossing some of the highest nobility.
What of it? Potek grinned.
It was toothy, and Kalira made certain not to flinch.
Anyone who puts their personal advancement over the interests of the Imperium and the Empress is committing treason and should be cast into the depths. Why, the very notion that...
The second rant went on longer than the first. Perhaps it was the affinity the Adixi shared with Shilvanti for the ocean, but some of her curses were inventive. In the Adixi's view, the law should be inviolate and above all politics, in the service of the Imperium. No one should be above it, no matter their wealth or popularity. It was an interesting rant. All her life, Kalira had enjoyed her station as a noble, but as busy as Mother was, she, Countess Samilla, and Lady Wickhama had educated her in one thing, that while power and privilege were something to enjoy, they weren't inherited virtues. Being born a princess was pure chance. No matter which goddess Mother looked to as the Empress, in private she always looked to Hela, the goddess of fortune. Setting up a battle to win was always a matter of skill, but walking out of it alive was always a matter of luck. The hardest thing was having to agree with Potek. Professor Warwick had opened her eyes to different species in the way that the palace never had. His view of humanity, for all its faults, was illuminating because he admitted his people's faults. Potek looked upon the Imperium with a view bereft of any compassion, compromise, or sense of proportion. It made her a legend at her work. But as much as she needed Potek's help, it was maddening to have Potek agree with her, for all the wrong reasons.
We're going to need more names, Potek said, eventually. If, as you suspect, she wasn't acting alone, then we need more names, and important connections in order to bring charges. One dead admiral is no case at all. We need more names, and prominent ones. If you can get the evidence, then important names will attract attention. Stir the waters, and people will take you seriously.
I've got that in motion, I think, Kalira swallowed.
Watching the Adixi get animated was even more daunting than her standing stock still.
I've called in my cousin, Indara. She has connections. I may have a problem until she gets back, though. I keep thinking that someone's going to try and kill me any moment.
So what? You're a grown woman.
The Adixi blinked once. You have all manner of protection about you, and if something should happen to you, you can take consolation that I will follow the blood scent of your murder all the way to the very end, Your Royal Highness.
Thank you. That's very comforting, Kalira said after a moment.
For some reason, it all felt a bit more real than it had before she walked into the room.
The one thing I really wish I had was a lead. If it's Camordry, how is she doing this?
Oh, I wouldn't look to your sister. If anyone is casting a net right now, it would be her head of personal security, Kadira Sariva.
Potek stood again.
Her predecessor was named Jubilee. Yes, that's it. Jubilee died under rather curious circumstances only 2 years after Camordry came to maturity. Being an adult, Camordry selected a compatriot when she retired from the interior to attend to family duties.
Her head of security?
Oh, indeed. I saw her only 3 weeks ago in the palace, so I know she did not travel with your sister's entourage.
And her predecessor was?
Murdered. Oh, yes.
The Adixi sniffed, as if testing the waters for blood.
I don't know the details, though it was professional enough that a killer was never apprehended.
Who would know the details?
Potak went still for a long moment.
I believe Duralay left a widow, named Kembrin.